So today I thought it'd be interesting to have a conversation with Eric Denholm. So Eric is a senior associate at TBB Planning. Eric has a focus on urban design and planning and how they interact. Eric's been in the industry for about 15 years and he's operated a lot in the greenfield spaces and also in retrofitting sites as well. I thought it'd be good to have a conversation with Eric about town centres and how they work around Perth and WA. And so, Eric, thanks for joining us. My first question is, what does the ideal new Perth town centre look like? So from an urban design perspective, and like, is there any examples that you've worked on and any examples, say, from around the world, really focusing on those kind of greenfields Perth sites?
Sure. It's an interesting question. There's obviously different types of town centres. Can you see that?
Yep.
So this is, I thought I'd just highlight a bit of history here because WA's been on the forefront of good urban design policy for the last 25 years with livable neighbourhoods. And it's worth just thinking about what the issues were in the first place. So this is a local centre that is in Meadow Springs. So you can see there it's got two or one major arterial, and then it's got another sort of secondary road. And the typical response is to place a car park there that can capture trade from 25, 30,000 vehicles that are going past the front door. You know this stuff very well. Setting up a big box for everyone to come off the car park and into the centre itself, and then we've got loading areas and whatnot. As a result, what that means is that entire local centre might work in isolation of those issues for traffic, but really puts up a barrier between it and the surrounding residential fabric. So it's really failed to integrate that centre and have any benefit from a walkability point of view with the surrounding context. So from a design point of view, that's certainly something that Livable Neighbourhoods 25 years ago sought to address. And basically, if we were to do this centre now, what you would imagine is you would pick one of those, probably the less busy street, to be your main street, and try to set that up for a trading frontage. And you would think about how you could integrate the surrounding community a bit better. Now, that's important to consider because you've got to realise that we're not just doing things just for the retail. We can't obviously do a centre in the absence of retail, but to have a balanced planning outcome, these centres need to be civic places as well because they're community places, they're where people gather, and they've got to be welcoming even if you're not wanting to buy something from the front door. So what we have now is we can consider things through the. Have you heard of the urban to rural transect, Tim?
No, I haven't.
So have you heard of the movement New Urbanism?
Yes.
New Urbanism is basically a movement that came out of the US that has been adopted quite widely in an Australian context, but basically considers that if you look at our history and the context of local centres, we have a lot of suburban development, and that's typically this one here in the middle. And then we have a big box, a local centre to service it. And the failure of that movement is conventional suburbanism, is that we don't get the rich tapestry of different environments that you would create in a true urban environment or a true city. So what the new urbanist movement sought to do is put in place transects. So transect is basically something that's come from the environmental movement, but the urbanists actually sat down and said, well, you can actually think about the city along the course of different transects. So we have our very urban areas, we have sort of general urban, we have suburban, and then we have the sort of the peri-urban and the conservation areas. And that might sound self-evident, but it's really useful to think about because when you have that organising principle, you have a range of different standards and different approaches that you would take for each transect. So
Mm.
within the urban environment where we have our centres and whatnot, we're going to have very walkable streets. We're going to have buildings that meet the street. We're going to have very ordered and formal structures with the way we plant trees. We might use exotic species, etc. All these little cues to give the person who's navigating that space the idea that they're in a centre. A suburban environment is going to be a little bit more of the buildings that are amongst the landscape, and then so on and so forth. So you get the picture there. With the local centre context, the other thing that we set up in the planning fraternity is when we're thinking about centres, you generally have a 400-metre walkable catchment. So that there
Yep.
is a 5 minute a 5 minute whoops 5 minute walk,
Yep.
um, and 400 meters is about 50 hectares radius. We set up 15 dwellings per hectare. That was deemed the minimum amount of density to efficiently run transit, so a bus stop, and
Yep.
support local amenities. So a very local floor
Mm.
space of, say, 200 square metres could feed off 400 metres at 15 dwellings per hectare. That's roughly 750 dwellings. So when you
Yep.
put together four of those neighbourhoods, you're looking at sort of 3,000 people, and you're starting to get the sort of density that would support a neighbourhood centre or the sorts, with
Yep.
about 3,000 square metres of floor space and that kind of thing. Now, the
Mm.
arrangement of those is where it becomes not a one size fits all. So, and then you can zoom out to, district centres where you've got other attractors that are not just now the convenience of the neighbourhood, but people are actually going to seek those more specialty stores. And again, traditionally, we would set those up with massive car parks in the facing highways. Now, when we
Mm.
think about them, we actually want to think about the anchors being on complete opposite sides to where we want to force people to walk. And you can even think about car parking as anchors as well. So people are going to slip down past the big box into the main street and activate these spaces. So intersections, something that we used to move buildings back from, are now seen as something that's very important because they're confluence areas. This is where people meet
Mm-hmm.
and interact with the street. So trying to set those up so that we have the maximum amount of trading frontages on those heavily trafficked areas is really important. And you
Mm.
actually see where this is built in. So that looks theoretical, but it's built in practice. This is Point Cook in Victoria, and it's about 20,000 square meters retail space. And you can basically see you've got your anchors in the corners, and then trying to activate those spaces. So you can see how they've moved away from the busy arterials, and they've created their own little world by
Yep.
connecting up and stitching together the neighbourhoods on the less busy roads. So that's a
Yep.
really, really nice precedent.
Yep.
Um, do you want?
And this, how much of this stemmed out of America as opposed to Australia of this kind of concept?
Yeah, it was all sort of happening in concert. And Australia, to be honest, Western Australia were the leaders. Although the US had some good examples on the ground, they had no agreement in policy. And Western Australia, through Evan Jones and this company, Bill Burrell, who was awarded the contract to do livable neighbourhoods in the first place, were one of the leaders in the Western world to create a new urbanist policy that was agreed through government. And
Mm.
problem in the 1980s and 1990s that they were trying to solve was they had a whole raft of policies that were all saying individual things. So you had the Department of Education wanting their 4 hectare school site. You had a different policy dealing with just retail. You had a different policy dealing with utilities, and livable neighbourhoods brought them all together. And the idea was that by doing so, you'd get a more cohesive urban outcome. So the
Mm.
Americans were still viewing the arterials and just basically locating car parking to respond to to a big box. Whereas we had set out some pretty clear guidance that we wanted at least a main street or a hybrid centre. So a hybrid centre is one that you're looking at there, where you've got a little bit of an internal mall that's
Yep.
accepted, and then some kind of main street frontage. And the way you do that is setting up a street that's to the entrance to the estate, which could veer off and carry a comfortable amount of traffic, say 7,000 vehicles a day, that's perpendicular with the main movement corridor. So you still accept that you've got fast foodies and servos and the like that need that traffic to
Mm.
survive, but a really healthy mix of traffic at slower speeds where you can calm the traffic, you can have the on-street parking, create that comfortable environment that's a trading frontage was a really sought after thing to do. So now then when we see local centres built in the last 10 to 15 years, this is pretty typical. You know, this, you can imagine this
Yeah.
on being Marmion Avenue, and
Yep.
there are various examples in the Northwest Corridor that have that design outcome.
Yep. And then, so from say a human level, what are the outcomes of poor urban design?
Obviously, one of the things, if you know, I don't know if you've ever heard of James Howard Kunstler, but he's an American urban critic, and he has this funny joke that he says when you're in an empty car park and and you can't quite see, or you can sort of start to, it's so open that you can start to see the curvature of the earth. That's nature's way of telling you that you've done a human scale incorrectly. So what he's meaning by that is we do have some guidance that we use for defining human scale. And basically, the Renaissance ideal is a one-to-one ratio. So when you walk through many European towns and you can go back and tell your friends how great it was that you could walk everywhere. One of the elements that you don't really notice, but unconsciously humans relate to, is a very comfortable one-to-one scale. And there's variations on that are acceptable. A 3-to-1, 2-to-1, that kind of thing. That's all that all feels sort of okay. And it's not just about enclosure, because of course you could have a concrete wall that's a parking structure, for
Mm.
example. That wouldn't feel too nice, but that's the starting point. And then it's all about getting trading frontages and openings as well. So if that enclosure gets out of control, i.e., you've got large swathes of parking where the ratios make it more like 20-to-1, that's where you get uncomfortable because you've got nothing to relate to, and you
Mm.
can feel lost in space a little bit. And this is why the new urbanists and the planners that followed suit have sleeved car parking. So we always put buildings that meet the street. We still
Mm.
cater for the same amount of car parking, but we make sure they're now behind the buildings. And we have these little slips in the buildings that can enable people to come out in the street. If you're looking for a built example, Wellard is is a really
Mm.
good example of that's basically implemented all those principles to a T, done by Phil Barrell and Ben DeMarchi at TBB. So this is obviously feeding off a train station, off the Wellard train station, running perpendicular. So the train station itself acts as an anchor. So instead of just having a large car park, you accept that one side has a car park, but the other side, using the train station as an anchor, using a big box as an anchor, how can you activate that space? And you'll generally notice that there's nothing over in a greenfield setting. It's really hard to make a local centre that's sort of longer, I would say, than 150 to 200 metres. There's just not enough density or wallets walking past those trading frontages to make them any longer. So
Mm.
that clarity actually makes you focus on a very single street generally in the WA
Mm.
context, and then you can get it right. And this is a really good example of, yeah, you've got physios and cafes and things that are feeding off the big box without it all just being internally focused. So this is sort of a nice outcome from a design point of view, but from a strictly from a purist retail point of view, it probably wouldn't be the ideal outcome because the dollars at the end of the day for those leases would probably be admittedly less than if they were in an internal mall. And this is always the struggle. So Lakelands is another good example I can do that's more of a hybrid to show you that. So this is just up the road from Meadow Springs where we were
Yep.
before. And Lakelands is a
Mm.
really good example because you've got basically, you can see here you've got I think Coles is there, and then you've got a mini
Mm.
major of Aldi there, and you've got a tavern here. So what they've done is they've created a square. There's a bit of a hybrid mall through there.
Mm-hmm.
So they the people who are running this will have some higher rents from the internal mall. And that's some of the
Mm.
reality that planners have to tussle with because you
Mm.
generally do get lower prices on the main street, which is a real challenge. But by locating your majors on opposite ends of a street, you can at least start to create more traffic and force people to walk past and activate the main street, which in turn is going to eventually create higher rents.
And I think
So
I think
there's a lot of
one
challenges.
of the issues in any greenfields locations is that it's, the kind of the chicken and the egg. Do you build the shopping centre before the people, so the people buy there, or do you wait for the people to buy there and build the shopping centre? So I think, as time goes on and these areas like Lakelands, Wellard, etc., fill out more, the this planning will more come into its own because there will just naturally be more people walking around, and especially more people living, within, say, the 400 meters radius that you talked
Mm.
about.
Yeah, so if that's only 750 people, and let's say that bumps up to 1,000 with a bit of density, what do I would have thought a Coles or Woolies would have only got excited about a catchment of say 20 to 30,000 people. Is that about right?
No, less than that. More like kind of 4 to 6,000 ish.
Okay.
But yeah, yeah, more 4 to 6, maybe a bit more than that. But it needs to be growing as well if it's at that low areas, those low
Yeah, yeah.
catchments.
Because the other issue, of
Um,
course, is, and you will know this better than me, but when we're designing these centres, we're told that obviously to get a Coles or a Woolies in, especially when they're on the margins, you end up lowering the square metre rate that they would
mm.
get for their leases. So you effectively are subsidising these guys so that you can create rents for the specialties.
Yeah, well, I guess it's the old adage, you buy in bulk and they lease in bulk and therefore get a better rate. Yeah, yeah.
So
And then so
one of the oh, go on.
no, yeah, sorry.
I was going to say one of the exciting things I think about the aspect of affordability. I know everyone's fairly anxious about how high the median house price is getting in WA, is that it does actually open up the opportunity for more diverse housing stock, which is going to support more density for centres. So again, one of the big challenges with centres in a greenfield setting is that in order to make these work, there's been large tracts of land that's been just put aside for parking, and for good reason. You know, parking decks typically are roughly $50,000 per bay to construct, so incredibly expensive. So the only way you can make them work is if land prices are supporting that, and you don't have those land prices out in a greenfield setting. There could be, with increased land prices now, we won't see deck parking out in greenfield setting anytime soon in Perth. But what we could see at least is the opportunity for at least the streets that they surround to be sleeved by some higher density, apartment type or townhouse type living,
Yeah.
which that's a small little win that we could start to have another tool in the toolbox to
Mm.
from a design point of view to start creating some really nice walkable streets to these centres.
Mm. And then, so in the news, yesterday, the day before, the Tesla robo taxis are doing their trials, and I think now they're on the limited release where if you're on the trial, you can order a robo taxi and it will pick you up and drop you off. Now, obviously, Waymo's already doing that in the US, but Tesla has a much bigger base. They build however many, 500,000 maybe cars a year or more. I don't know. But so there's more Teslas floating around. How do you think then that's going to change the demand for car parking? Maybe not tomorrow, but into the years in the future, number one. And then what else would we do with the car parking if we find that one year it's only ever 70% full, and then it's 60, and then it's 50, and then next thing you know, there's a long line of robo taxis picking up and dropping off, and the car park's not full.
Yeah, it's a big opportunity, isn't it? Typically, parking standards are already overinflated, depending on the area. A lot of people are now accept a lot of local governments now accept 4.5 to 5 car bays per 100 square meters of gross leasable area. That's a lot lower than, say, when you're looking at things in isolation and you're doing say, a doctor's practice or just a standalone shop. You'll typically be looking at eight up to 8 car bays per 100 square meters of
Mm,
gross leasable area. So if there's the ability through people driving less and people getting deliveries and all that kind of thing, and those parking rates can drop again, then it just frees up more land for either housing that's going to support the centres or more retail space. In the WA context, we probably don't need a lot more retail space. It's about making what we have work better. So, yeah, more space for housing and more space for civic meeting spaces and town squares and centres would be a massive plus for these centres with lower parking rates.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it can change, as you said, it can change the commercial outcomes for the commercial property owners and tenants, but it's just about getting it right, getting the planning outcomes right as compared to the commercial outcomes, because there's nothing worse than opening a new shopping center and a lot of the tenants don't survive. That's obviously subject to
Yeah,
a range of things such as the catchment and the ease of access and things like that. But yeah, no,
you're
it's
dead right. I
interesting.
mean, look at just so this has been a Rockingham and Mandurah focus, but if we go to the north of Lakelands, now we're getting into Golden Bay, you can see just that. This is where a main street has been, and I don't know the full history of it, but has been probably a little bit ill-conceived. In some respects, you can see they were trying to do. They're doing a very traditional thing of the car park and the shop, but then whether or not it's been a planning requirement that's been forced on them, but there is the token main street, and because it's away from all the traffic, that's been sitting vacant for some time
Mm,
and really struggled to get tenants because it's
mm,
just not, from a market point of view, it's not fronting its customer base. So you've
mm,
got a lot of people coming in and out of the car park. So I'm not suggesting that we should always concede and to go to big boxes and car parks in a conventional setting because that design didn't work. More so, what I'm suggesting is this should have been thought about a little bit differently, such that the main street is working from a market point of view, not as an afterthought.
mm.
Um,
Yeah.
can I show you something that, because we've been focused on greenfields and I do infill
Mm.
stuff as well. I just want to show you
We've only got 2 or
something.
3 minutes left, so yes, but quickly.
Okay, I just want to show you something that we did recently with a IGA site in Guildford. So this is a historical setting, as you know, and so it's a different way you think about things because you've got heritage considerations. And the reason I'm bringing this up, Tim, is because your comment about making it work from a retail point of view. So one of the things we did early on was before they even appointed an architect is just from a massing point of view, did a quick study to understand in a constrained 2,000 square meter site, what is the most efficient use of a massing to create the floor space that they need and the car parking that they need. And the
Mm.
tenant's preference without doing this exercise was putting the car bays at the front. But we're able to demonstrate that, in fact, if we meet the street, so we have a better design outcome and we seek a car parking variation because we would have lower car parking rates and loading just tucked down the side. If we can achieve that, we can actually keep the tenant and the owner happy by doing
Mm.
more floor space, but then also keeping the planners happy by creating a continuous trading frontage.
Mm.
And that's now been approved. So that was a really good little case study of a nice little win where, yeah, hopefully this will start coming out of the ground and contribute to the Guildford Town Centre, which is really exciting.
Very good. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. Thanks for your time. That's very interesting.
My pleasure, Tim. Congrats
Thank you
again
very
on setting
much.
up the business. Looking forward
Thank
to
you.
doing a bit more with you.
Thanks, mate. Cheers.